here in Brooks Camp in Katmai. We are above the Brooks River here, just the oxbow of the river, looking out this marshy area here. It's entirely possible that at some point this broadcast may be interrupted by bears. We can see a few of them way out there, sort of grazing like cattle off in the distance. But this is the Ask a Ranger feature.
Exactly. It is a chance for us to answer many questions that you have been posing to us online throughout the summer on the explore.org website. One of our partners, they're making it possible for us to have this conversation today.
Absolutely. You guys have submitted these questions in the featured comment section of the website, and we still encourage you to submit those questions. We still would like more. We will be doing more of these sessions, and we would love to see what questions you guys might have about Brooks Camp, about the bears here in the Brooks River, and about Katmai National Park. Happy to answer all of them, and we're going to get to a few of them today. We'll probably talk for 15 to 30 minutes or so.
Absolutely. And I must say, this has been a bumper crop of questions. We've had some great ones this time around. Now, much as Andrew commented before, this is a time of change. Not only are the leaves changing, but conditions for both bears and salmon are also changing.
Yes.
Speaking of bears and salmon, let's ask some of these questions today.
Sure, let's get to it.
So, first one here. Can you give a rough idea of how much 503 might weigh and its size compared to a large dog?
Yes, yes. I love these sort of questions. These bears, if you haven't heard, are pretty big. They're pretty massive, but it can be really hard to put that size in context, perspective, right? So we like to often compare them to animals that we know a little bit. And in 2014, at about a year and a half old, he was abandoned by his mother. He was sort of left off on his own, and so he was sort of wandering around lost, and he was actually adopted by bear 435, nicknamed Holly. She actually adopted him, raised him as her own cub, essentially. She had another cub at the time, and she raised him, which gathered a lot of attention for not only its sentimental value, but that's really uncommon in the bear world. It's not something you see every day. So that got a lot of attention on the internet and here in Brooks Camp. He is now emancipated, running around as one of our many subadult bears we have here. We have a real bumper crop of subadults running around this year, probably about 10 of them that like to hang around Brooks Camp here, and he's one of our larger subadults. So the question was about size and how big is 503, because on the webcam it can be kind of hard to tell. That's a big waterfall at Brooks Falls. It's going to be hard to tell how big these bears actually are. And sort of zooming out a little bit, when these bears are first born in the dead of winter in their dens with their mother, they're about a pound. They're 1 pound in weight. So they're pretty tiny. These creatures that grow to be relatively massive start out as very, very small. They're about a pound when they're born, and then later in the spring, when they emerge from their dens about April or so, they're actually quite a bit larger by that point. They're about the size of a terrier, basically. They're going to weigh about 20 pounds. And when they emerge as spring cubs, they're going to be darker, almost a black in color. 503 is now a subadult. He's been emancipated from bear 435, nicknamed Holly, and he actually has the nickname Cubadult, I should say. So we will use his number, which is 503, and his nickname Cubadult interchangeably. But he's running around as a subadult. You'll see him fishing at the falls independently by himself, and he is larger. He's well on his way to becoming one of our heftier bears. He is currently using an educated guess, probably about 400 pounds. He has not stepped onto my bathroom scale anytime recently, but knowing what we know about other bears of similar size and appearance, we can guess that he's probably about 400 pounds. And for perspective, a large St. Bernard is probably around 200 pounds. So he is about twice the size of a St. Bernard that some of our viewers may have at home. Wow. But even more impressive is that he, again, is a relatively young bear, about 4.5. These bears can live well into their 20s sometimes, so he's going to get quite a bit larger. By the time he becomes a full adult boar, he might tip the scales at about 1,000 pounds. So he's going to get pretty heavy here. It's current trajectory, he could be one of our larger bears in just a few short years. Again, 400 pounds and only 4.5 years old, and getting heavier this time of year by the day. Yeah, I just love those questions because, again, these bears are so big. You see them on the webcam or from across the river. I can see them sometimes when I'm looking across the platform, and it's just they look It's relatively small from a distance, and then when you see them up close and closer and closer, they're huge. They're absolutely massive.
Excellent question. Let's go to another one here.
Sure.
Are there any king salmon mixed in with the other salmon?
Yeah.
Also, what is the water temperature in Brooks River?
Both really excellent questions. So obviously the reason that the bears are congregating here at the Brooks River is for that salmon. Obviously we've seen the photos and the video of the salmon jumping at Brooks Falls. Far and away, that is overwhelmingly sockeye salmon. That is the by far the most prevalent species we have here in the Brooks River. About 400,000 salmon came up from Bristol Bay through the Brooks River this year. And we also have decent contingencies of silver salmon, also known as coho, and a few pink salmon, also known as humpies as well. But again, the majority of our salmon here are sockeye. I have heard, legend has it, that every so often we have a sighting of a king salmon. It is relatively rare. Few folks have reported to me that they have seen king salmon. I haven't seen it myself, but word has it they're there. I guess all the more reason to keep watching those webcams and see what we can see at the falls. But king salmon are the biggest species of salmon. They're quite large, quite bigger than the sockeye, so it's pretty easy to tell them apart.
So the really impressive picture would be a king salmon leaping up over the waterfall, being caught by a bald eagle. That'd be peak Alaska right there.
The bears would also love catching a king salmon, I have to imagine.
That makes for a really
treat.
Great shot. So keep your eyes peeled for a possible king salmon. Super rare, but can happen. And then there was also a question about water temperature.
Water temperature. That's really interesting too. So water temperature. The Brooks River is currently about 50 at the dead of winter. And water temperature affects how those eggs develop, how quickly they develop specifically. Basically, the warmer the water is, the faster they develop. It's less incubation time. The colder the water, the slower they grow. So if you have warmer water, it's possible that the eggs could hatch ahead of schedule, and then the fish would be in the water in the dead of winter when there's not a whole lot of food available. So it's possible that if they hatch too early, the fry are swimming around, there's not food, they could all die. They could starve to death. So it's very important when the eggs are laid that the water is the right temperature, particularly as we move into fall, September, October here. There seems to be a real tipping point around 57 degrees Fahrenheit for the survival of those salmon eggs. So this is particularly important as we think about issues like climate change. As the waters warm up, that could decrease the survival rates for a lot of these salmon and give us fewer salmon in the future. So it's very important, but currently the water temperature of the Brooks River is a crisp 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
It's an excellent example of a simple question that often has a complex answer.
Yeah, and sort of attached to these larger issues of just climate change and how things are changing over time.
And for anyone interested, check out the Southwest Alaska Inventory and Monitoring Network. They're one of the groups out here that are studying water temperature within the park. So we're actually developing baseline monitoring trends to be able to see how water temperatures change over time, in part to protect the salmon species that we know and love.
Absolutely.
Another question tied to the salmon.
Okay. Dark, for example, and they go out from freshwater into saltwater in the ocean, where they spend most of their adulthood, and then they do this really incredible thing where they come back to the same exact stream where they're born. But they go out to the ocean basically because of the availability of food. They want to go out to the ocean to get big and fat. It's basically access to the grocery store. They're going out to the largest cafeteria in the entire world, the open ocean. And that's where they're going to get big and fat and happy and strong, essentially. They're going to spend 1 to 4 years in the ocean, and then they're going to come back. And we have seen fish that are in the ocean for a less amount of time come back prematurely, if you think about it that way. They are smaller. They're what we call jacks, salmon that spend only a year in the ocean and come right back. And they do not have as high of a success rate as far as mating and spawning. You can imagine, too, coming up this river is hard. They're at basically the culmination of a 7,000-mile journey. This is the climax of their life. This is the big show. And they're going to need as much strength as they can possibly have to get through all of that. So, yes, the bigger the salmon, from their perspective, the better. More time you can spend in the ocean, getting fatter, that's a good thing.
It's a phenomenal story.
Yeah.
So, incidentally, biggest cafeteria in the world, not on a cruise ship.
Not on a cruise ship, absolutely not. The sea itself, yeah. And out in the open ocean, those salmon are feeding on plankton, copepods, little tiny creatures we call pteropods as well. They're feeding on all of it.
Yeah, it's an incredibly fascinating story. I also love it in part because of the word anadromous. That's like a 5-point word, really.
It's a fun one to say. Yeah, what would that be in Scrabble?
I don't know. That would be an astonishing score if you could ever do that. Someone, if you have ever successfully used that in Scrabble.
Let us know in the comments.
We appreciate it.
Anadromous. A excellent question and wise forethought, definitely. So Brooks Camp in Katmai National Park is open to everyone. It is open to all ages. Katmai, for a number of reasons, perhaps does not see the same amount of younger visitors that other national parks do. But it's important to note that, this could be a really valuable educational opportunity. Seeing large wildlife in their natural habitat can be very exciting and, again, very educational. Seeing them from the platform, seeing these sows with their cubs is a really special thing, very special experience, one to experience with your family. But it's also important to note, and we tell visitors upon their arrival here on the beach at Naknek Lake during their bear safety orientations, this is not a zoo. This is far and away from it. The bears are not behind cages here. They don't come out at certain times of day on a predictable schedule. They're certainly not doing tricks or anything like that. This is a wild place still. We're looking out here on the Oxbow. This is wild and in a lot of ways untamed. Bears can go more or less wherever they want, whenever they please. So it's incredibly important that children remain with their parents, because obviously bears can come out at unexpected times. It happens to me on roughly a daily basis. I'm surprised by the bears that come out of the grass. So it's very important that we keep children who might be visiting close at hand and not let them stray off on their own.
And it is a remarkable experience that a number of children have had here. I've seen a number of small children in the park, and the consensus I get from them is, this place is pretty cool. It's a direct quote.
Whoa, yeah.
Yeah, it's actually much more exciting than what I just said.
And I will have to say that the Katmai Junior Ranger badges are some of the coolest in the entire park system that I've ever seen. Yeah.
And it's, once again, remarkable here. To have those interactions, it is, I don't know, you always remember it when it happens.
Absolutely.
Now, another question, surprisingly about bears. So,
we may have heard something about these bears.
We may have heard something about these bears in the past.
And we may have some coming up behind us at some point.
We may
constantly
have some,
on guard.
If you notice, when we're constantly looking out this way, we sighted bears out in the field earlier. So we are watching every now and then for that moment when a bear conveniently walks up right behind us. We don't think that's going to happen, but you never know. It would be an interesting way to close this out.
Absolutely.
So, to turn to another bear question. When a bear walks on the rocks in the water, why does he or she not slip?
Absolutely. So we can watch the webcam sometimes or be standing on the platform at Brooks Falls, and we can see them just sort of walking with relative ease over these slippery rocks right at the waterfall at the edge. And as someone who has walked this river, in the river and along it a fair amount of times, I've taken my fair share of spills. Those rocks are slippery. I can testify firsthand.
Agreed.
But bears have about 4 things going for them that we do not. First, they are lower to the ground. They have a lower center of gravity. And going along with that, in addition to being harder to tip over, they have 4 paws on the ground as compared to our 2. So they have more points of contact with the rock, more places to grip and brace themselves. Thirdly, as you may have guessed, these bears are pretty me with our 2 legs. And then fourth, they have these pretty remarkable paws. This is actually a cast from an older bear, but you can see how long the paws are. These are actually from their hind legs. These are their hind paws. And their forepaws are a little bit shorter, but still decent in size. So they're really long, really big. Again, a very big point of contact. And they also have these claws. If need be, they could grip these their claws on the rocks pretty well if they had to. But again, between their weight, having 4 points of contact, and their lower center of gravity, they're going to have an easier time than we would as humans. So it is pretty remarkable. You see them traipsing along the riverbank with relative ease.
Far more graceful than I could ever do this.
Yes. I, in comparison, am much more clumsy.
It's true. It's kind of fascinating how they have so many adaptations that can let them make a splash on camera without making a splash.
In the river. I see what you did there.
I know.
Absolutely.
That was not premeditated at all. So, do you have time for a bonus round of questions?
I am ready, Clint.
Oh, man. So, usually we're doing about 5 questions, but today, for the same price, we're going to have 1 more question here. Actually, it's a 2-for-1 deal. So it's 2 questions bound in 1, but I believe you can answer this.
I hope so.
All right, let's go with it. We're going to do it. We're going to do it. Okay. So, how do the female bears emancipate their young? Second part of that question, what age are cubs weaned? Go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we mentioned, we have a really big crop of subadults around here this year. These are cubs that have been recently emancipated, but they're not yet full adults. They're not yet sexually mature, so they're not really about 2.5. And it is relatively abrupt. She will pretty much just turn on them one day, relatively violently it could be, and chase them away. And when they'll try to get closer, she'll chase them away again. It can be relatively stressful for the cubs, and you have to imagine they can't really understand what's going on. One day, mom is very friendly, hanging out with us, we're nursing, and the next day, all of a sudden, she's beating me away relatively violently and chasing me away. We saw that happen firsthand earlier in the season here in Brooks Camp. This typically happens earlier in the summer, around June. And we had that happen to a couple cubs, and they were just walking by themselves on the road, whining, just making all sorts of noise. Because, again, they were confused. They had never been on their own. And you can imagine, going through that stressful experience, a lot of the siblings are still going to huddle together. You'll see that. Different siblings from a litter will hang out together until they reach sexual maturity sometimes, and then eventually go their own ways. But it's very abrupt. She will just turn on them and sort of beat them away one day. And I think the second question was, when are they weaned? Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So when do they stop nursing? So a lot of visitors sort of ask this question, so there's all that salmon in the river. Are they done nursing? Are they still consuming mother's milk? The answer is yes. It's not an either or. They can be nursing at the same time that they are eating salmon in the river. If you know anything about bears, they love food. They will eat anything and anything, anything and everything, anything and anything. And they will consume that milk at the same time that they're eating grass, berries, and salmon. They will be nursing as long as they are with her, essentially, until they're emancipated.
This is for real. This has happened. There will sometimes be trains of subadults moving throughout the park, which creates... Yeah.
Like a conga line, yeah.
It is a conga line of cubs. Fantastic image. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So, folks, it is about time for us to go now.
Thank you for the fantastic questions, and keep them coming. You can add them on the featured comment section of explore.org. You can also comment on our Facebook posts, and we can try to get those in there as well. But we will have a couple more of these sessions, and we're happy to answer your questions. Keep them coming.
Yeah. Stay tuned this week, folks. We have a number of great programs coming up. So... we're excited to keep sharing with you the story of Katmai. Once again, a round of thank you to everyone. Thank you, Explore.org, for making this possible. And also, thank you, Ranger David, for being the tech guru who makes this all run. It's been a blast, folks. Have a good evening.